Good morning and welcome to Get a Shift On. This week, I'm delighted to welcome Jules Tabberer, who we met actually at the air show in Torbay back in June. We had an interesting conversation. Jules is part of the RAF Reserves and has had a very interesting career. Jules, welcome along.
Thank you very much. Cheers for having me.
Thanks for joining me. And I think it'd be really interesting for my listeners and viewers to hear all about your career journey. I know we were talking about it in certain education, careers, advice yourself, onto a magazine, Roland, which must have been really interesting, and now at the Met Office. And obviously underlying all of that is your time in the RAF Reserves. So start at the beginning and just tell us, what do we need to know about you and how you got to where you are today?
Okay, so a bit of a false start, I think, probably to education and career. I went to college and studied A-levels in English and Media Studies, but ended up leaving in my second year. Just, I think, had a bit of a crisis of confidence, about being able to pass exams and various different things. So I completely dropped out of it. Ended up just kind of working for a bit. I worked in a cardboard box factory, which taught me pretty early on that I didn't want to do a manual job, and they required no qualifications. And then I sort of took a year out, and then went back to college and did an apprenticeship. So an MVQ apprenticeship on day release in business administration, because I figured that business administration was probably always going to guarantee me a job in some way, and I'd be working in a nice air conditioned office as opposed to a hot sticky factory. And I actually was employed by Exeter College doing that apprenticeship. So I did business administration, worked at the college in admissions for the college itself, which was great. I enjoyed that time, but then went from there to work for the careers service in Devon and Cornwall, providing careers in a secondary school, which was great. I liked working with young people a lot, and also working kind of in the community with young people that had kind of, issues with getting into school or getting into college and accessing that, etc. But then on the side, I was a drummer as well in a band, in a couple of bands, and toured with those bands and played gigs for those bands all the time, etc. But because I was a drummer and that was my passion, I also worked in a music shop in Exeter, just moonlighting at weekends, because I'd meet other drummers and could get, kind of drumsticks and stuff, get paid in drumsticks and various different things, which was cool. And through that, I ended up meeting some people that worked for a magazine, and I ended up doing a little bit of writing for them at first, before eventually they had an editor position, which they asked me to fill, which I've never done any kind of editing work before. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire, but it was 2 years of really, really hard work. And then I took a day off in that time, or a holiday, but I enjoyed it. It was great. It was a great way to connect with that industry, meet lots of people. And from there, I ended up getting headhunted to work for Roland, so musical instrument company, on the drum side. Joined them as a product manager in 2012, where I worked with them for 13 and a bit years, until I left literally a couple of weeks ago and joined the Met Office in a complete kind of change of industry. But that is indeed linked to my work in the Royal Air Force as a reservist, and what I get from that, working in defence and wanting to kind of bring that into my full-time career, really.
Amazing. That's quite a trip of careers from the very unexpected. I've got to ask, what we do in the cardboard box factory? Is it literally making cardboard boxes?
Yeah, it was a cardboard box factory up in Barnstable that literally made cardboard boxes, and I did various different jobs. But one of them was, when you open a cardboard box from flat packed, it's a printed piece of cardboard. There was a piece that glued it together along one edge. So I worked on a gluing machine, which I interestingly lost my arm in an accident at work, but I didn't, thankfully. So that was what I was doing in the cardboard box factory. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting start, and obviously come a long way from there. When you were editing the magazine, that must have been, you said that was quite a big step, not something you really thought about doing. How did you manage that? How did you really kind of find that opportunity? And what skills did you bring from previous life into that? Or was it all learnt on the job?
I think I had some inherent characteristics that I took into that. I think one of those things was just a kind of will to make it work. I'm not afraid of hard graft, and I think I just threw myself at it. and was like, I'm going to keep pushing on this until I get this right. And probably like all of us, there's plenty of mistakes made in that journey as well. So, learning from those and trying not to repeat them. But I think that role required some people skills. And I think I'm naturally kind of quite comfortable in talking with people and presenting. And in that role, you're a face of that magazine, of that title, really, both to your readers, but also to the artists and the community and the professionals and all those kind of people that you're trying to pull into and feature in the magazine. There was that. Writing, I've always been good at kind of writing things. I can be quite verbose at times. I'd always enjoyed that right the way through school, etc. And I'd done like little bits of writing here and there, just some reviews that I'd written and stuff, and had written some gear reviews for some magazines, etc. As well. So that kind of was a really nice creative outlet. So as well as being the editor for the magazine, I did a lot of writing for the magazine as well. So that was a really nice creative kind of part. So definitely brought that skill set into it as well. Proofreading was a challenge for me because I'd never been a professional proofreader in any way, and that's where some of the mistakes came in. There was a few things that got through, made it into the mag, which I'd see afterwards and go, oh no, dropped a ball on that one. So that was a hard challenge. But also I think the cycle of a magazine, it's like almost like having a sales target, month by month, is that the first of the month it completely resets and you've got the whole thing to do again. And I was doing 13 issues a year. So it was, constantly on a treadmill, which made it very difficult to get leave and time off, basically, because you're constantly having to work at that and manage other contributions, workloads, budgets, production schedules, work with designers and so on and so forth. So the minute you step out of that environment, they've kind of lost their leader, really, the person that's kind of managing it and organizing it. So that was quite a challenge, which is why it was a busy time. But I think I learned an awful lot from that experience. I think both about myself, about upskilling, etc., but also probably about working with other people and how to interact with other people, and a lot of management experience of that as well. And like I say, not all of it through, a lot of it through making mistakes, I think, and trying to learn from those.
I think though, making mistakes is absolutely the way we learn. I know it's a bit cliche and a bit fluffy, which I'm never a big fan of. But that is true. I think especially in that sort of role when you're at it constantly, like you said, and I'll be honest, I'd never really considered as a magazine editor that you're bringing out 13 magazines a year. And as such, I guess you never have that time off. So yeah, hardly surprising, I guess, when you make the odd mistake in proofreading. And actually, it's probably quite nice because it shows that human element, unlike the AI, should we say, of today, where everything is perfectly polished. And I'm sure that would be a very different
Indeed.
role if you were doing it now.
I know there's so many tools that I would use now.
I don't know if it'd make it easier or more complicated. I think sometimes, obviously, ChatGPT is great, and I won't deny that I use it for various things. But I think it's the way you use it and how you use it. And actually, it can make it more complicated. And if you start relying on it, I think that's when it becomes quite dangerous. And that's when you see that falseness, I think, in some social media and other copy that can be so hard. And then obviously you went on to Roland. So that must have been really exciting, given the fact that you had gained all these free drumsticks at some point earlier on in the career. I was just looking because I had some sat here because I'm not a budding drummer, so I just like to tap and do something. It's the same as doodling on my pad. So maybe you can give me some lessons at some point. But tell us what you did as the product manager at Roland and what skills and how you brought that in to that role and the changes that you had to make and how it affected your life.
So working for Roland was amazing. First of all, it felt like like a massive win because I'd been working in this industry for only really a couple of years as this editor, and in that time I'd done some things with the magazine, worked with designers and stuff to bring some changes and things. And Roland was one of our customers at the magazine, so they would do advertising, etc., but also sending gear for reviews and various different things. I remember going for a meeting with them when I was still the editor of the magazine, with our advertising manager as well. So we were talking about editor advertising, and I just kind of hit it off with a great guy at Roland, and we were starting to talk creatively, and they were looking for a product manager. Gave me a call after the meeting about a week later and sort of said, look, we're looking for a product manager, struggling to recruit the right person for it. Have you got any thoughts? And sort of, okay, reading between the lines, are you asking me like who I think could be a product manager, or are you asking me? And he was like, oh, might you be interested? And that's where the conversation really started. So it felt like a huge honor for me to be sort of selected from the industry I'd just worked in. And they were very complimentary. He, a very good friend of mine now called Martin Hopkins, Mars, we call him. He was very complimentary about the work that I'd done in the magazine and recognized that, okay, that skill set to do that and to turn those things around and manage that, process, etc., were skills that you could bring into product management. And although I had no product management background at all, which is another thing that Roland gave me, I think they gave me the opportunity to go in and do that, which was great. For sure, a bit of a baptism of fire. I was working as a UK product manager and managing the product, but providing huge support to the retailers, to the sales teams as well. So that came with quite a lot of pressure. And yeah, I think that self-starting attitude definitely helped with that. Again, the people skills, because you're working with your customers, your dealers, you're also working with your internal sales and marketing teams, etc. So building those relationships, gaining trust. I think all of those things were things that I'd bought from the magazine experience really into that job. So yeah, and I over the course of 13 years, I moved from a UK product manager to a European product manager, and then eventually was asked to move into a global role, working for the headquarters team, who are based in Japan, Roland being a Japanese company. A title was a global strategic product marketing manager, so it's still product management in that sense, working on product lifecycle, product development, understanding your customer and your market, etc., and working on a product that's fit for market, but also then delivering that and overseeing that to the market as well in terms of, marketing assets, marketing delivery and campaigns. So, I guess I must have been doing something right along the way to get, jumped up a few different times. And it's an incredible honor that to have that ability to move up and that kind of my dedication and my skill set was recognized. I think that's an achievement that I'm really proud of, and I was quite sad to leave Roland in a lot of ways. I've got a lot of love for that brand, a lot of love for a lot of colleagues and great people that are there, and of course for the product as well. So it's quite hard to leave that. But at the same time, I knew I wanted to get closer to working with defence, because through my RAF background, the RAF had basically said to me I could go regular if I wanted to as a full-timer, but that presents challenges, obviously, for the family. As a reservist, I basically contribute time that I can, and I can almost pick and choose to a point my deployments and things like that. So if you're deployed and it's really not a good time for family or work, etc., you can appeal so that you don't go on that deployment. But as a regular, you just need to. So you've done 3 years on a station, and they'll say your next job is going to be here or there. You might be moving from Scotland to, Cornwall, or even you might be suddenly find yourself, living over in Cyprus or Gibraltar or something like that. And I think from a family perspective, I've joined the military, but they haven't. So, where my daughter goes to school, her friends, friendships, our support network around us in terms of family and friends, etc., all of that's quite important. And we would lose that if I were to become regular. So staying as a reservist, but finding a way to kind of bring the military connection into my full-time job was something that I wanted to do, which is why I left Roland. But I think that journey at Roland was an incredible experience for me. And, I gained an awful lot of skills and experience through working with them.
It sounds like it was a really interesting time, and with that skills and experience to take on then to the Met Office and the defence side. What a fantastic opportunity. Did you travel lots with Roland? Obviously, you said they were headquartered in Japan. Did you get over there? What was the best trip you had?
It was, there was a lot of travel, which, I was 32 when I joined Roland, I think. And, that's really exciting. At that point in your life, my wife and I, we didn't have our daughter at that point. And, so to be flying out to Japan or flying out to the US or, et cetera, in different places in Europe was hugely exciting, to go and get to do those things. I think over the course of my time at Roland, I visited Japan 15 times. I was in the US an awful lot. So towards the end of my time at Roland, last couple of years, I was reporting into a Japanese colleague, but based in the US. So in California, so I would visit him and the team I was in there quite regularly as well. So I did an awful lot of travel to the US. And I think at first, it was great. My European job, I did an awful lot of travel around Europe as well when I was in that role, which was wonderful to see parts of Europe, and experience different cultures, etc. I think a lot of people maybe think that travel is really glamorous in your job. I think the reality is I saw an awful lot of, taxis, airports, rooms, hotel rooms, and, going into various different offices, didn't get to experience, like travel in the way that we would love to in a leisure sense. But still, incredible to experience different cultures, meet people from different walks of life, different languages, overcome the sort of communication barriers of language, etc., and trust and build relationships with people in that way. Again, that's a skill set that I sort of took forward. So those things were great. A lot of illness, an awful lot of illness. You'd be surprised how much illness you pick up from traveling so much. Lots and lots of colds and viruses and all that kind of stuff. And I think actually the reality is, in my later part of my career at Roland, the travel just was getting tiring, really tiring, and I had a desire to travel for work less and spend more time at home with my family actually. But again, as the opportunity and the experience that I had to travel was great.
I completely and wholeheartedly sympathize and empathize with all that you've just said about travel, having done exactly the same thing. 3 kids, I lived in America, I traveled all over the States, traveled over Europe. I've had some amazing experiences. And like you said, when you first start traveling, number one, it's super exciting. You love it. You think you get to all these places. The reality, and to pick up on what you said, is that I would go from airport, taxi, hotel, hospital, taxi, airport, home. I didn't really see anything much at all. So I completely get it. As exciting as it is, and don't get me wrong, and I'm sure you said with your wife, you had some great trips, and there are some added bonuses. And when you get a bit of extra time to visit somewhere, that's really lovely. And I had a lot of points, hotel points, and airline points. So there's a lot of first class and business travel, some great hotels. They are the perks that come from it. But actually, it becomes really hard, especially then when you have a family and you start to slow down and you don't want the same life. And actually, I've spoken to 2 of my ex-colleagues from America on the podcast before, and one of them coined it a phrase as a road warrior. And I love that phrase because it's exactly what it is when you're just constantly out and about doing something. And actually, Japan, 15 times, is quite an arse in a fairly short time. Once a year, it's not around the corner. So that must have been, quite tough. And again, I understand that wanting to slow down as you kind of come towards the end of it. And also, and I don't know how old your daughter is, but you don't want to be away. You don't want to miss those opportunities. And I know we spoke beforehand that your commute now, 20 minutes, makes such a big difference.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. I think there's a hidden part to the travel as well, which is not just on you. It's like family wise, there's an awful lot of things that I've missed, through being away, which I'll never get back, with my daughter. She was growing up. She's a young woman now, so you can't get those moments when they're very little back. But also the pressure it perhaps on my wife as well of having to pick up the pieces if I'm away for 10 days or 2 weeks at a time. The running of everything as well as all the childcare and all the responsibility falls on them. And obviously we have a house and we have a mortgage and a lifestyle like everybody else does. I think those things become very, very hard. And as my daughter's kind of, into kind of secondary school, and, GCSEs and things will become more important, etc. I think I felt like there was that need to redress the balance a little bit. And as you say, now being 20 minutes up the road, from where the Met Office is and from where I work, having a office place to go to, because before I would kind of work at home, occasionally go into the office, which was Reading based, and then go out and travel when I wasn't needed there. But now having a place to go to and being home in sort of 20, 25 minutes after work. And when I get home, I'm like, here we are, we can, do everything from kind of homework to go to the beach or being able to cook dinner for the family and things. Those are things that I wasn't experiencing, and only a few weeks or a couple of weeks into my job at the Met Office, but I'm really valuing that time right now.
And it's that time that's so important for you, for family to have and to share those moments and memories. And when we're traveling, when we're doing jobs that are so high pressure with all the rewards, let's not get that wrong, but you do miss some of that home life. And yeah, 20 minutes is an ideal commute on a good day, I'm sure. There'll be
Yeah,
the odd
yeah,
accident
absolutely.
here
Yeah,
and there.
yeah, sure.
Tell me a little bit then about where the RAF fits into this, when you started the reservist, and what you've done as part of that. And again, I'm sure such an exciting and varied, separate career almost in the reserves.
Yeah, it is almost like having a second job or a second career, outside, which is amazing. So when I was at school, I was really interested in joining the armed forces, and I was thinking about joining the army actually, rather than the air force. But I didn't end up doing that, because I was in bands and playing drums and all that kind of exciting stuff. And suddenly, when you're young and impressionable like that, what's very important to you one day completely changes in 180s the next, etc. So I ended up not doing that, but I always had in the back of my head that I would join like the reserve armed forces, and I thought about joining the territorial army and various different things, but it just never really came about. But I'd always had this kind of I don't know, sense of armed forces being important and an interest in that. And I think just in the day to day, it wasn't always there, but occasionally these little thoughts of, oh yeah, I was going to think about doing that, I should think about doing something about that, should happen. And COVID and that time coincided with my 40th birthday. So I kind of reached a significant birthday and COVID was happening, and I was watching on the TV, the armed forces out there, in the community, helping people, driving ambulances, delivering supplies and aid to people, carrying out COVID tests and stuff. And I felt this enormous sense of wanting to contribute to that, like to do my bit, basically. I'm sure a lot of people felt they wanted to kind of help people during COVID lockdowns and so on. And so I thought, right, okay, now is the time. And actually, sort of 2 years prior to that, I'd been at the Torbay Air Show, which is where we met, from a recruitment stand, which is again what I was working on when we met. Had said, "Oh, if you thought about joining the armed forces?" And so I was probably in my late 30s at that point, and I'd said, "Oh, yeah, I kind of had," and they gave me some leaflets, etc. And I even went to an open day with my squadron, which is based at RAF St Morgan, 505 squadron, based down there. And it was great to go and sort of visit them, etc. But I was still a little bit like, okay, where does this fit into my life? How does this work in terms of time, etc.? I talked it through my wife, and she was kind of saying, well, you go out and play drums a lot, and you're cycling quite a lot, and you're away with work an awful lot. So where does this fit in? Understandably. And at that point, I think the reality is it didn't really. But like for everybody, COVID was a big kind of leveler and bit of a reset. That's where I went back and sort of said, actually, this is important to me. This is something I want to do. Perhaps I need to put some of the other things that in my life as a back burner and focus on this. So I then applied to the reserves in it was early summer 2020, and it took a whole year to go through the recruitment cycle, from initial kind of like interviews and tests and whatever, through to selections and medicals and all the kind of different processes you go through. And that was partly because, again, COVID was just slowing things down a little bit, but it can take some time anyway. So I finally attested in summer 2021. So realistically, only 4 years for me in the reserves in that time. The first 18 months for me were all based on my training. So you go through the basic training, which is what we call the green stuff. So learning to, fit into military life and do some, basic skills required of military personnel, like how to handle a weapon or how to do, first aid, if a disaster happened, etc. And how to kind of look after yourself and look after your kit and have that sort of sense of discipline. Then once you finish that, you go through and do your trade training. So everybody in the RAF is no generalist anywhere. That's just in the, you will always have a trade. So you will be a driver or a chef or a logistician somewhere, or, a pilot, or, air crew or ground crew, mechanics, whatever that role is. So the trade that I do, it took another 18 months for me to do the training in that specific trade, which, was quite, a big commitment, because there was lots and lots of weekends away and occasionally taking a week here and there or 2 weeks here and there, etc., around my job to go and fit that stuff in. And I was taking leave to go and work somewhere else effectively, to do that. So wasn't getting a lot of downtime. But as soon as that finished, the gloves are off really, in terms of your training wheels are off, and that's where you get to go and do the job. And for me, I've got to work with lots and lots of different units, lots of different squadrons in RAF, which is great experience, but also just the variety of people that you meet and places that you work. And then I went on a deployment, an operational deployment. Effectively, I came out of my job for 3 months, and was then employed full-time by the RAF while I'm on deployment. My job is held open for me, so the law protects that my job has to be there, etc. And my pay transfers from my civilian job, so from Roland at that time, to the military. They paid my salary, so I wasn't losing any money effectively, but I was then sort of on deployment operationally, and I was working on an operation called Op Shader, which is basically about coalition Western forces against Islamic State and Daesh over in Syria and Iraq, in that kind of area of the world. Effectively defending democracy and allowing that to happen. So that was a great thing to be a part of, and I enjoyed my time over there. Proud to have served. I joined the reserves to go and do something meaningful. And you can be a reservist and never deploy, so you're always just kind of training and doing things to be in the wings. But actually, for me, joining the reserves was about getting out there and doing the job that you have trained to do operationally, and contributing to the work of the armed forces, and to the good that we're trying to achieve. So it was great to be a part of that. And yeah, so really it's a separate career, because within there I've got a separate progression opportunities. I'm still quite young in my career. I'm only sort of 4 years in, but there's various different ranks that I can go through. I've got the opportunity to commission if I wanted to, so to become an officer effectively and go through that training, but also to go to different places, do other deployments, other training opportunities, etc. And it's a wonderful thing to be a part of. It's changed my life, both in terms of perhaps about some of the things that I've achieved that I never thought I might achieve, but also my perspective on things. Yeah, it's really been a game changer for me.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I'm sat here and I'm just thinking about the massive change and shift from traveling to Japan or the US for business, and then traveling to Iraq, Syria for the RAF. Worlds apart in every way, I'm absolutely sure. How did it feel flying into, and I presume, give or take, a combat zone compared to that sort of business travel? How did your family feel? How did you feel?
It was really interesting because, from a business travel perspective, I've sat on a lot of different planes, or different aircraft, different airframes, etc., and various different seating places, from economy through to sort of kind of business, really. And when you get on an RAF Voyager, so the Voyager is the aircraft which carries people, but also does air-to-air refueling as well. And it's the Voyager that will take you and, various other people out to wherever they need to be. So really, the Voyager is like a civilian Airbus. It's like being on an A3 or something like that. It doesn't really feel that different inside, but the difference was I was in uniform, I was in full kit, etc., and I was obviously flying out to, in this case, to Cyprus. So I wasn't really flying into like a hot, kind of war zone. We were flying to RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, although that's obviously very geographically close to things that are happening in the world, obviously to things that are happening right now, in terms of Israel, Lebanon, that area, Syria, obviously very close there, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, not too far away, etc. So it didn't feel dangerous. It didn't feel that different to, like physically to actually, being on a civilian aircraft, but it did feel different in terms of its purpose and the fact that I was in uniform and doing something really exciting. So yeah, it was a different experience for sure.
Yeah, really just very interesting. I'm fascinated. So I've family in the military. It would have been a career option for me. So it always interests me to have that conversation and hear a bit more. My brother flew into Afghanistan on several occasions, and we've had similar conversations. So it's always interesting to hear that. Such a contrast between flying in a suit, flying in military uniform. You
Yeah.
talked about purpose. How strongly do you think that purpose drives someone's career, be it a primary career or a secondary career, like being a reservist And how strongly do you think someone should have that purpose to drive them forward in their career?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think probably when I, going back to that time, of like quitting my A levels, etc. I really think struggled with a sense of purpose at that time, and the after effect of quitting A levels and working, in a manual job that required no previous skill, no previous training, and me having effectively only GCSEs at that point but no other qualifications, made me feel a little bit, like purposeless, really, in terms of where I was going and what I was going to do. And I felt the need to pull purpose back into my life, which is perhaps why I went and said, okay, I've got to get some qualifications. I've got to do something. And by that time, I was really focused on, getting qualifications that were going to help me to get a job that I could do that was practical rather than just wanting to go through the academic route, really, which is why I chose business administration. So to your question, is purpose important? I think yes, massively so. I think if you don't have purpose, you're really, really going to struggle. I don't know why this is coming to my head as we talk about it, but I was reading a story, a book about an air crew that had to dip into the sea. And as you might know, if you're on a life raft might deploy and you've all then got to get into this life raft and look after each other. But at that point, you're in the middle of the sea, in the middle of nowhere. No one knows whether your airplane's gone down or not. And, you've got to survive. So you don't really know what survival looks like. You could be there for weeks. You could be there for hours. You just don't know. And at that moment, you start to sort of go into despair and shock and that sort of thing. And I was reading this account of somebody who was saying that his whole thing was about making sure that somebody on that life raft had a job to do. So there was, one chap who was obviously clearly in shock and, really starting to feel quite desperate and perhaps, really pessimistic. So we just gave him the really simple job of, your job is to make sure that every couple of minutes you have to pump air into the life raft, because without that, we're not going to, be able to survive. And somebody else had the job of, right, you need to make sure the flares are in the gun and ready to go in case of this. You need to listen out for aircraft. And somebody else was like, emergency rations, you need to, have those. So I think that sense of purpose in that environment was incredibly important. It helps the difference between people, stay alive and not stay alive. And if you take that same thing through to just general life, I think we all need to have a sense of purpose. So I do believe that sense of purpose drives you. And I've always felt ownership in the jobs that I've taken on. So when I worked at Roland or whether I worked at the magazine or whatever, I really felt that sense of, this is mine to own. And this is mine to drive. And it was really a self-starter. And I think that comes from that sense of purpose. So I do think it's important to have. But I also appreciate that you need to find purpose. Purpose isn't just given, it's not just there. You have to find purpose in what you do and find the things that for you help you to want to push and want to drive for achievement, whether that's a personal thing, whether that's a business thing. I think you've got to find that thing that helps push you forward.
Absolutely. I think finding that purpose is so easily spoken about, but so hard for many to do. And I think it takes quite a lot of time, and probably years actually, to find that purpose sometimes, because we all go through different iterations of life. As we've talked about today, you go through those different journeys, and you talked about COVID back in 2020. And I think that did change a lot of people's outlook on life, on purpose. That's for me where it all started as well. So absolutely, I think trying to find that purpose is so important. And the example of the chaps in a life raft is spot on, isn't it? Giving someone something to do to stop them from despair. And I can only imagine how difficult and challenging a situation like that must be. How have you overcome some of the challenges that you must have faced, like we all have, in your career, in your life?
Good question. So, there are times, I think, when times feel pretty hard, don't they? And most recently, there was a lot of change in my last employment. And I know a number of my colleagues, as well as myself, really didn't always feel good about that change. And I think change in an organization will always happen. And, I'm not one of those people that's closed off to change. It always just needs to be the way that it's been and whatever. But I think sometimes there can be really positive change, even if it takes time to manifest, and there could be change which is perhaps not so positive. And to me, felt like change that was really not so positive. And I was still in the job, still loving the job, but feeling like really pulled. Somebody wanted to pull me in this direction, or the business wanted to pull me in this direction. And I felt it was really important for my product and my category and to deliver on that, which is hugely important to me to kind of move in this area or pull this way. So there was a clear sort of opposition, really, I think, in where we needed to go. And managing that was really quite difficult because I've ultimately, got to go where the business is going to go. It's not for me to tell the business how they should do things. I can advise and I can suggest and I can, etc. But you need to go in that way, which is, of course, what I did, for me personally, that felt like a difficult thing to do. And it led to a situation where I was like, right, okay, I'd wanted to find a way to kind of make military more of my career, but didn't really know what that looked like, if that makes sense. But I knew that it would mean switching industry. And I was feeling kind of down about how things were going at work. And it was quite a stressful process to go through. So it was difficult. And it probably impacted me and my mood and how I felt about things for a little while, because work is so much of our life, isn't it, that you can't help but work will impact, your day to day. I felt like it was a really difficult situation. I was at a job that I loved, a company that I loved, a brand that I loved, but felt that the direction that they wanted me to go in was not the right thing at all and would take away quite a lot of that enjoyment. So that was a hard moment where I really had to kind of look at, okay, you've got to make some choices. Where are you going to go with this? And it would have been easy to stay there and to start kind of, like a bit of a doom spiral and be more and more negative and become that guy, I'm not, don't like change and those different things. But staying there because you've got the security of the job and the salary and those things, or to uproot myself and try and do something completely different, And I remember when I was on my deployment, I was off of a shift and it was New Year's Day. And, it felt strange because I spent Christmas and New Year away from my family and I'd never done that. And I just had this urge of, okay, you've got to do something positive today. And you've got to try and find a job in defence. So I did a job application in defence on New Year's Day when I was off shift. And I didn't get that job. I don't think I even got an interview for that job. Just even the process of like pulling myself up out of the, how I was feeling and doing that felt like a real moment of empowerment. And I guess I always think to myself that, whether it's a physical injury that you've got or a relationship breakup or job situation, etc. I don't know. A lot of those things are always going to be really, really hard. And don't get me wrong, I am definitely one of those people who, for a time, is kind of paralyzed and perplexed by it and will kind of wallow in the kind of, the misery of it. But there comes a point where if you don't want that to perpetuate and just continue, you have to find a way to pull yourself out of it. You've got to do something. It could be a small step, talking to somebody. It could be I'm going to go to the doctor and talk to them about that spot that's been worrying me, or whatever it is, or I've got to try and apply for a new job, or I've got to do something. You've got basically got to try and find a way to turn that thing around. And if you just keep perpetuating it, nothing's going to change. And that's the only thing really, is that I've tried to hold on to that and to try and be a self-starter and try and find that purpose. If your purpose becomes, I need to stop this and turn it into something more positive, then any step that you can do towards that is only going to help.
My job here is done. I don't think we need to carry on the podcast. I don't think I need to carry on ever making any other content, because you've literally just said probably the most important 2-3 minutes of anyone I've ever spoken to. And it just makes me so happy to hear what you're saying, because so many people need to hear that. If you're stuck, you just have to do something. And it's always good to hear when someone has done it and has made such success of doing it, as hard as it may be. So
I don't know right now. I don't know right now, even whether the decisions that I've made and the choices I've made are going to pay off in the long term. I don't see that evidence yet. How I feel starting a new job in a new industry and a new career is like $1 million. I know for me is like, will work really hard to succeed in that. And I will work really hard to push myself forward in it because of that purpose we talked about and that kind of desire to achieve it. But it's still a risk. All of it was a risk. And, for me and for my wife, we talked about, the disruption to salaries, pensions, security, all kinds of different things that we talked about as part of it. But in the end, I'm convinced that change is the right thing to do. And as scary as it is, even though there's no certainties in it, I think just sometimes taking a leap of faith, what's the worst that could happen? I'll have to find a new job and work really hard at that somewhere else. What's the worst that could happen?
Again, I'm going to shut up and say nothing because I was going to ask you. Absolutely, you've done it and you're happy. You feel $1 million. What's the worst that can happen? Because that's the bit that people have to understand. The worst that happens is that you stop and you go back to what you know. Because there's no shame in that. There's no harm in that.
Yeah.
It is just what you have to do. If you're willing to make that leap of faith and you've had good support from friends, good support from family, then you are in the right position to do it. I'm kind of lost as to what to say because really you've just answered all of my questions, my whole ethos, my whole purpose in 5 minutes of amazing conversation. What I want to just ask you to finish up though is it's all very well for both of us to say this. We've been through it, done it. We've taken that leap of faith and it's paying off. We feel $1 million. What would you say to someone who is stuck in that spiral, in that doom spiral, going round and round? I hate my job. I hate my life. I know I need to do something. I just can't. What advice would you give to someone who needs to pull themselves out of that spiral?
Like you said, difficult to, because it depends what kind of position someone is in and where they are. But like we were saying, really, is that you've got to try something and try and pick out the things, try and identify the things that are causing you the harm or the worry or the damage or the whatever, and try and find the space to move forward. The RAF has got a wonderful acronym, which is about how we conduct ourselves. And this has taught me something really important. It's called RISE, and R stands for respect, which is respect for the self, respect for your others, integrity, service before self, so putting the needs of the service and the needs of other people before yourself, and then excellence in everything you do. Not easy to live by, but actually that often sits in the back of my mind, and one of the things that you should pull out of that is respect for yourself. And I regularly talk to my daughter and my family about the importance of those things. And we all have a right to be happy. We all have a right to succeed. We all have a right to enjoy life. It's not a given that we have to be in a position we're not happy in or in a dark place or whatever. And if you can find that self-respect, if you can find that kind of, integrity, what's important to you and what is right to you, and just try and use that as a rope to just try and hold on to. And like we were saying, just take a step, try and identify, what it is that's really pulling you down and do something. Just even having a conversation with somebody, it doesn't have to be as like, okay, I'm going to go straight into like doing this qualification or this job application to turn things around. It could be small steps, but do something rather than try and stay in the same spot, because it will pay off in the end.
Thank you, because I think that is absolute golden. I think I needed to hear that, and I know people listening and watching absolutely needed to hear that. What's next? What's next for you with the reserves? Obviously 2 weeks into a job, so I know there's just the excitement of that. What's next with the reserves?
So this year, I've got a number of different things to be a part of, which is going to be great. And, I'm just looking forward to getting kind of stuck into some of that stuff. Some of it will be more kind of green orientated stuff. Some of it will just be doing my job. So that's hugely exciting. I'm kind of in the process of whether I want to go through a commission to be an officer or whether I want to stay in the junior ranks but work my way up through the career ladder there. So I've got some kind of thinking and some choices and things to do there as well. And of course, I hope to do another deployment in the future. I was with a Typhoon squadron on the last deployment on Op Shader. And I'd love to do more stuff for Typhoons because the fast jet world is very exciting. So hope to do more of that as well. So yeah, that's all to come, I think.
Amazing. Sounds super exciting, and not sure you can hear, but helicopter of some description is flying over as we speak, just to honour what happens. Good luck if you go for commission. What an amazing opportunity, and good luck with all of that. comes. And I presume, and I know the answer to this, you would recommend that someone looks at reserves if that's something they want to do?
Absolutely. Like, I haven't looked back. It's been one of the best things and most defining things I've ever done in my life. And it literally has turned it around. If you've got an interest in being in the military, give it a go. It's totally different to the regular life. You can join up until you're 55. You don't have to be qualified. You don't have to do something that you do in your civilian life. You could do something completely different. I would just encourage anyone, if they've got an interest, to go and check it out, because it's really an amazing thing.
Amazing. Jules, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for absolute words of inspiration and amazing ability to share what you've done and how you've done it. The RISE acronym, all of that is just so powerful, and it's clear that you have that strong purpose and will to do the best you can in whatever you do. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time early on a Sunday morning, and also thank you for your service as well, because that means an awful lot to me and a lot of people around as well. So thank you for all of that, and I wish you all the very best with everything you do moving forward, both work and with the reserves as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave.